Welcome everyone to today's Avid Webcast Talk series. These sessions were created for Avid customers and partners who administer, design, use and implement Avid products with the aim of helping you to become more successful with the deployment and use of the Avid products. And today's session will focus on iNEWS and provide you with information and recommendation on how to maintain the health of your iNEWS database. Today's session is a live webcast presentation. This session is not designed with polished marketing content, but instead we have a less formal style, which is focused more on providing you with technical content and as much demo on live systems as possible. I'm Jason Plews, Director of Avid Global Services Education, and I will be the host of today's session. Today's technical content will be presented by Tom Hansen. Tom has been with Avid since 1994 and has over 36 years of industry experience. Tom has worked with iNEWS and its predecessors for 25 years and started with Basis Automation Systems back in 1989. Basis was purchased by Avid in 1994 and the newsroom business was spun off into a company called Avstar LLC. That was back in the late 1990s and eventually folded back into Avid in the year 2000. Tom has been involved with newsroom products through all the name changes, right the way back from Basis through to NetStation, Avid News, Avstar, and now finally iNEWS. Prior to joining Basis in 1989, Tom worked for the ABC radio networks in the news division for 11 years and was a Basis user. Tom is currently our product champion for iNEWS NRCS, iNEWS Command, and co-product champion with Sylvan Labrosse for Media Central, which he became involved with in late 2011. So now it's time for me to turn you over to Tom for the session today.
Okay, thanks Jason, and welcome everyone. So today we're going to do a brief overview of iNEWS database maintenance. The session is targeted for system managers who really don't have a lot of familiarity with the topics but are responsible. So for you experts out there, this may be a bit of a review. So we're going to talk about three things: preserving your data, that's backing up your data, effective database backups, restoring your data from those backups, and maintaining the health and space of your iNEWS database with our tools and utilities that we have available. So we'll first begin with the DB dump utility for backing up the database and the site dump utility for backing up site configuration files. Now I am going to be switching screens here to the to my Linux command line system, so you'll see a bit of flashing on the screen as I do that. I just apologize, but don't really have any other way to do it here. So we'll start with DB dump. Again, this is a command to back up the database. It has a lot of options, and I'll start by just listing those options. By typing DB dump and pressing enter, that will display the usage for this command and all the options that are available. Too many options to go over in this short period of time, obviously, so we're just going to touch on a few of them lightly, and of course you always are welcome to experiment with different options for backing up the data. The first thing we'll do is a full database backup. So what I want to do first is determine which queues are being skipped by the DB dump, and those are queues which have the skip flag or X flag set on them. It's easy to tell just by typing in the simple command list flags equals capital X and D for directory, and it will list all those queues. In this case, it's mostly wires. I seem to have the show queue X flagged as well. The dead queue is always X flagged because it's the trash basket, and we're not really interested in backing up stuff that we're deleting anyway. So that's pretty typically normal, with the exception of the show directory there, which we would normally back up on a typical system. The command to back up the database, again, is DB dump. We're going to do a complete backup. Well, let me just show you something here. Typically, the backups will default to the system's tape drive. these systems are virtual. They're running in VMware, so we don't have tape drives connected. And it's my understanding anyway that most systems that customers buy today don't come with tape drives. They don't purchase them. So we're going to be backing up to a file. If I just hit return here, it would complain that I didn't have a tape drive attached to the machine. So that is the default. So we will have to use the switch to back up to a file. In this case, I'm going to, the switch is -F, and the file is going to be in the home SO DB dumps folder. And I'm going to give it a file name. We'll just call this 11-5-2014-DB dump. And I'll hit return, and it's going to go through, and it's going to start backing up the file. The V option in this command is for verbose. So it's going to display each queue that's backed up and how many stories in those queues it's backing up as well. While that's going on, I'm going to open up another window here, and we'll run through another dbdump command to save a little time. In this one, I'm going to back up a specific queue, and I'm going to or folder, and I'm going to back up the system folder. The system folder contains a lot of your configuration for your iNEWS system. It holds all of the forms that are used to display your stories, all of the keyboard stories with macros for your users, your monitor map story for monitoring rundowns for production devices, a lot of other things, and it's pretty critically important to how your system functions. So we're going to back that up separately, and I'll just do dbdump capital C for complete, V for verbose, -N, and then I can list up to 10 directories or queues I want to back up here. We're just going to back up system. I'll give it a -F for a file, the path, and the name of the file. We'll call this 11-5-2014-system. Of course, it's going to run through pretty quickly because while this has a lot of system configuration files, it doesn't have a lot of stories actually in them, in the queues. So I would recommend backing up your system folder anytime you make changes to either your forms, your keyboard stories, your monitor map story, your MOS map story, your Action Server or TXNet Server job lists, anything that is used for configuration for the functionality of your system. Just back that up and save it. Keep a copy of it. It takes minutes to do, and if you ever have to recover that data, it's going to be vitally important. You don't want to have to sit there and recreate things and try to rebuild something from memory. So good idea to back this up. The other thing we're going to back up is the system site files, and that we do that with the sitedump command. Sitedump -H will give us the usage. We're not terribly interested in a lot of this. Again, sitedump defaults to the tape drive, so if I press return here, it's going to tell me there's no tape drive or tape device. So I will have to use the -F switch again to back up the site files to a file. The command is pretty simple. I'm just going to type in sitedump -F, the name of a folder path, and the name of the file. We'll call this 11-5-2014-sitedump. Okay, I got an error message here, so I did something incorrectly. Can't open the file or directory. Okay, I must have mistyped it. So let's go up. Cursor up just takes me up to that command I just entered, and I think this is called site dumps. Okay, and that's pretty much it. You will make typing mistakes, and if it's me, I make a lot of them. So what do we do with those files? Currently, they're on the hard drive of this iNEWS server, or these iNEWS servers. And while that's okay if you ever do lose your system drives, even if you have a RAID, I've seen sites where we've lost 2 drives around the same time, and the RAID is no longer functional, and you lose the data that's on the drives. So it's a good idea to copy these files elsewhere, maybe even save them off-site. I've got a program running here called WinSEP. It's a free program you can download from the internet, and it allows you. It uses it uses SCP, Secure Copy, to copy files to and from a Windows machine and a Linux machine. In this case, it's very handy. So I'll switch to the connection I have to the C machine, and I'll open up the DB dumps folder, and there's my DB dump of my system files. And I've created a folder on my local hard drive on my desktop called iNEWS Backups, and I just have to simply drag and copy the file. So it's a pretty handy tool, works well. I can copy my site dump as well. So I've got that information. I've got that information backed up off the iNEWS servers, just in case of a disaster strikes my iNEWS servers. And you can also copy that to a USB drive, save it off-site somewhere, thumb drive, keep it in your pocket. I don't know, wherever you want to keep it, but keep them safe. You may have backup systems as well that back up other software and other databases for your network that you might want to back it up to as well. So switching back, that's site dump and DB dump. The next thing we're going to talk about is restoring data, and from either a DB dump tape with the DB restore command or from a site dump tape with the site restore command. So going back to my Linux screen here, again, just typing DB restore and pressing enter will give me the usage here for the DB restore command. And again, there are a lot of switches and options available to you, and allows you to do a lot of things, but again, we don't have time to go through all of this. So we'll go through a couple DB restore commands just so you're a little bit familiar with them. DB restore, and I'm going to just restore directory. I'm not going to restore ISAM files or anything else. I'll use the verbose switch so you can see what's happening. -N, and I'll restore system.forms.r.rundown. And I'm going to restore it from, and I have to specify the file here since I don't have a tape drive that I'm going to restore it from. So it's home, so DB dumps, and 11-5-2014-system was the name of my file. And again, that form probably doesn't exist in this database. Let's see. Let's try another one. DB restore DV -N system.wires.distribution -F/home/so/DB dumps /11-5-2014-system. Okay, so that restored a story from the queue system wires distribution on the DB dump, in the DB dump, to the actual queue in the database system wires distribution. There are also ways to restore stories from a queue on the DB dump to different queues in the database, but that's for another time. And to list the DB dump, it's also a good idea if you're making a DB dump sometimes to afterwards list the contents of the DB dump to make sure that you actually got everything that you need. And the switch to list is a T, and I'm going to do D for directory, V for verbose. So it's not actually going to restore anything. It's just going to list the contents to the screen. And again, I'll give it the path. Let's see, did I do something wrong here? It's not finding it. Oh, right, the date. Okay. TDV. Minus F. And that's going to list the contents of that DB dump, and then I can scroll through it however I want to review it and just make sure that it's backed up everything I intended it to back up. The site restore also you can restore files in the site area, site directory of the Linux area of your system. If you happen to make a mistake or delete a file, remove a file, you can restore from the site dump. So it's always a good idea to have a current site dump. Whenever you modify your config file, your system profile, your dictionaries, your host file, it's a good idea to make a new site dump so you have those changes backed up, the current changes backed up. So site restore -H will just again review the usage of this command. Again, we're not going to go through all of this, but I will restore a file. So let's say I happen to accidentally remove my config file. This is the configuration file, which has all my device configuration, all my devices that are configured on the system. So very important file. And if I remove this, it's gone. I don't want to have to recreate this by hand. It might take me days. So what I'm going to do is just restore it. -V -F. Uh, 11-5-2014. I don't want to restore the entire site dump. I just want to restore one file, so I'm going to enter that file name, and there's my file back. So again, these are you're only as good as your last backup, they say, and it's always good to, whenever you make changes, back up your system files, back up your site files. You may want to periodically back up your archives. However often you archive, it's always a good idea to back up the data that you can't replace, so or not easily replace. So moving on, we'll look at Some other utilities that we have for maintaining database health and free space. All these commands we're going to discuss here are listed on your screen. The first one we're going to talk about is DB free, and this reports the amount of free space that's available in your database. It's a good thing to check now and then to make sure that you're, just to monitor how much free space you have, because the system obviously can fill up and it won't work if it fills up completely. Hogs is a command that you can run to monitor how much space is being used by stories in your database. So your database is made up of a lot of things. Stories is just part of it. It's also made up of your user records. All your user IDs are part of the database. Your directory structure, your security groups, your messages, your top of screen messages. These are all part of the database that are not really stories, but they make up the database. But for this command, this will measure basically how much space your system is consuming with stories. DB lines is a program that checks for story errors and other system errors in the database queues. Again, this is a good command to run periodically just to check on the integrity of your data, your queues and your stories. DB server is a program that purges stories from the dead queue. So when stories go to the dead queue, either they're deleted by users or they're purged from a queue to dead. They stay in dead until the system needs to reclaim space automatically, and then it removes them from dead and adds the space used by those stories back to the free list. But you can also run DB server manually if you want to clean out data from the dead queue. DB original removes previous versions of stories. So what does that mean? Well, anytime you make a change to a story, you create a new version of that story. So what happens to the old version? Well, in most queues, the old version remains in the queue. The current old version or the last old version remains in the queue. After that, old versions typically go to dead. But many customers set up their rundowns to save all versions because they want to have an audit trail to be able to follow all the changes that were made to a story leading up to a broadcast. When you archive those stories with all those versions get archived as well, and they take up a lot of space. So DB Original is a program that can remove those older versions of the story that you no longer need and free up that space so it can be used for other things. DB Visit will check for database errors. It rebuilds the free list and updates the free list and fixes link count errors. And there are two DB visits that we currently support. The traditional offline DB visit, which is supported in all versions of iNEWS, and the online DB visit, which is new beginning with iNEWS 4.5. So it's in any 4.5 release and up, the online DB visit's available. So we're going to pull up a Linux screen here again, command line screen, and we'll go over some of these commands just so you can see what they are and see how they work. The first one in our list was DB free, and you just type DB free and press return. This is a starter database on the system, so it's going to have a lot of free space. It's also a version 5 system, so it's got a 128 gig database, so it's got a lot to do here. And while we're waiting for that, I'll pull up another window and we'll come back to that when it's done. And sorry for moving these windows around. I know it's probably distracting. Hogs is the program to monitor how much free space your stories are taking up. Hogs question mark will give you the usage and it's pretty basic. It's just hogs and a path name, or hogs and we have a couple switches. So I will run a hogs here with a -v switch for story version count information. This is going to show me how many previous versions of stories there are, and we'll run it on the show folder. So this is going to go through each queue, and it's going to report. And I'm going to scroll up a little bit here because you can't really see a lot, but I'll go up to the last queue. Let's go up here, show training. So show training is using 1,753 blocks in the database. 1,741 of those blocks are actually shared by other queues. So these stories are also elsewhere. There are 13 stories in the queue with 2 versions. There are 2 stories in the queue with 28 versions. So that means that story has been modified 28 times, and there are 28 copies of that story, different versions of it, still in that queue. So typically, Hogs is a program that runs quite a while. It takes quite a while to build a report. So what we would do typically is redirect Hogs to a file to review at some later time. So I'll just run a regular Hogs here without the story version switch, and I'm going to redirect. The period represents the root of the database. So that's the start of the database. I'm going to do the whole database, the entire database. I'm going to use the Linux redirection to redirect the standard output to a file, and we'll call this hogs.log. And I'll use the ampersand character to run this in background since I don't want to tighten up my session here. And this may take hours and hours to complete, and I'll go back tomorrow and review it and see what I can find. The 5207 there is just a process ID number that for the Hogs program that I just started. Okay, going back to the DB free, it finished. You can see this database size is 33,550 some odd thousand blocks. These are 4K blocks because this is a version 5 system. So that means it's roughly 128 gigabytes. The free blocks on the system are currently 33,510,000, which rounds up to 100% of the database is free. You won't see this on a normal production system. It'll be more like 1 or 2%. This is a bit unusual. The free lists don't really pay any attention to this number. We get questioned about that a lot, and it's really not that terribly important. So that's Hogs, that's DB free. We will now look at DB lines. The DB lines usage, I can just type DB lines in a question mark and it will give me the DB lines. So DB lines and a path such as system.wires.distribution. We'll examine that path. So again, a dot would be the entire database. If you wanted to examine just the show folder, you would type in show. Your archives, you would type in archives, or a dot for the whole database. And most customers, again, well, this will take a lot of time to run. So we would again redirect the output to a file. Run it background, and then tomorrow we'll go examine that file and see what we can find. It will report story errors, it will report queue errors. You may not understand what the errors mean or what the messages mean, and it's okay to call us or open a case and paste in the messages you're getting so we can look at it and let you know if it is indeed a problem or not. That's pretty much it for DB lines. I'm not going to go through all of the other switches. DB server, one more thing about DB lines. I'm sorry. DB lines should probably be run once a week on your system, maybe once every couple of weeks, just to check to make sure that the data is in good shape. It doesn't interfere with any production. Users don't have to be offline for it. So it's just one of those commands that you can run and, as I said, redirect to a file and check on. And if you do notice anything, you can give us a call or open a case, and we can look at it for you and let you know if it is a problem. DB Server is a program that you might run periodically to empty out the dead queue, and you might run this program before a DB visit because you want to reduce the number of stories that the DB visit has to examine, so the DB visit runs more quickly. So DB Server, and we'll display the usage. Again, it's only got two usages here. You can either type in a high water mark that you want the system to get the free space up to, or you can type in a hyphen on systems that I think are 4.0 or 4.5 and greater. Older systems running 2.x or 3.x versions won't have the hyphen option to DB Server. So if I look at my other screen for a second, I'm going to see my free space is 33,510,000. So if I want to bring that up a bit, oops, one too many zeros, I can run the DB server to bring the free list up to 33,520,000. It completed pretty quickly. If I want to empty the rest of all the stories in dead, I can just type in DB server hyphen, and again, there's nothing in there to reclaim. So again, that command, it would typically be used if you want to empty out the dead queue for whatever reason, but most reasons would be you're going to run a DB visit and you want to lessen the amount of time the DB visit has to run by having to examine all the stories in the dead queue. DB Original is, again, the program I discussed that removes previous versions. Just typing the command and pressing enter, it will display the usage. Again, it's a pretty simple usage statement. There's not a lot here. The -A option will allow DB Original to strip stories that are shared with other queues. So by that we mean stories that get copied from queue to queue. We're not really copying stories, we're copying links to those stories. So if you want DB Original to remove the previous versions of stories in a queue that may also have been copied to another queue, then you want to use the -A option. And it's pretty simple. I can run it in background if I want, so it doesn't tie up my screen on my session here. And it's going to run through each queue in that folder. I'm running it on the show folder. As you can see, some queues it has found stories with previous versions. Other queues it's found no stories with previous versions. But it will tell you how many it scanned and how many stories it actually stripped previous versions from. So we'll let that run, and we'll switch back to my other system here. Again, that's a command, DB Original, you might run when you run into a low on space situation. We don't like you to get into low on space situations, but if you do, that's a program that you can often run on your archives to free up some space and get your system out of a low space condition. The last thing we're going to talk about, and we just have a few minutes, is dbvisit. dbvisit is a command that it does a lot of things. So it examines the entire database structure, not just the stories, not just the queues, but it goes through the whole structure of the database. The ISAM files, which are your user, directory, message, group, other files, your user blob files, which contain, their registry information for their desktop settings. It goes through system blobs, if you still use those, for the old CG title entry tool, your projects, if you're utilizing projects and facets. It goes through your directories structure, and then it goes through the stories. Once it's done with the stories, it checks the free list and the in-use list of blocks, and then it will either rebuild the free list if it's an offline DB visit, or if it's online, it will actually update the free list. So I'm going to go through quickly starting an online DB visit here, since many of you probably haven't seen this. And if you're running older versions of iNEWS, that is prior to 4.5, you won't have this feature available. So a little incentive to upgrade if you're looking at doing this, or wanting to have this feature. So typically, like any DB visit, you do have to take the system offline to the users for a few minutes. So on all your systems, all your computers rather, in your iNEWS system, your A, your B, and your C, if you have a C, you would take them offline. You would log out all users. You would shut down the servers. This is basically not shutting down the servers. This is shutting down all the iNEWS servers, all the iNEWS devices that are currently running, and it will put the database, close the database. So we've done that, we're going to use something called Checkpoint. You haven't seen this before if you haven't run an online DB visit, but what this is going to do, it's going to copy the free list on this system to another partition on the drive called the RP5 backup partition. So we're going to run dbvisit, we're going to run Checkpoint, and we're just going to turn Checkpoint on. And this is going to take a minute because the system has a huge free list. Normally this one take a terribly long amount of time. Once the checkpoint is turned on, I can then put the system back online for users and start the DB visit. So we'll just wait a moment. I apologize. Some of these things do happen to take a little bit of time. One question while we're waiting that might come up is, how often do I run a DB visit on my system? And it's a question that we get asked all the time. It really depends. It's not a thing that we can say you have to run this every 30 days or every 60 days or once a year. We used to recommend monthly DB visits, but systems, the drives have become faster, they've become better. We don't see as much corruption in the database as we did, 20 years ago on slower systems. But if it's a good idea to run this once in a while, and usually run it on a maintenance routine. Have it set up to run one every several months or something, and do it on a schedule. So Checkpoint is on. We're going to start up the system again. Again, if this was a multiple server system, you would start up all your servers. And if I run status, you can see the system's online. I've started the devices, startup does that, and the database is open with checkpoint. You run the DB visit on the master computer, which in this case it's a single system, so the master is C. So we're going to run DB visit minus C, DB visit minus D minus C, and that's going to run through. So it's already gone through the root files, the blob files, the projects. It's looking at the directories now. There's not a lot in this database, so it's not going to take long to complete this. If it does find errors in any part of the database up prior to the stories, in the later versions of iNEWS, it won't ask you to rebuild the free list. It will skip that. So you're going to have to make note of the errors and give us a call or open a case and let us know what DB visit found and engage us so we can look at it and determine how best to fix the problem. This should be a really clean database because it was a starter database and just put on the system yesterday. So while this runs, I won't tie you up anymore. We can, I think, proceed to the next section if we're ready. So I'm going to go back to our screen here. What will happen here basically is once it's done with visiting the free list, it's going to ask me if I want to rebuild the free list. This may only take a second, so if we can hang in here just a few more seconds, we'll go ahead and complete the DB visit so you can see how it completes. Of course, right now we've got a massive free list, so we're going to have a lot of dots and numbers here, up to 33 million something. It landed at 33. Okay, so that's the end. It's comparing the link counts. Now it's going to ask me to rebuild the free list. No free blocks to recover, so this is going to take long. I'll answer yes. It's asking me if I want to turn checkpoint off. Normally it does that by itself, but since this DB visit didn't have to change anything, it's going to ask me, and I'll say yes, and it's done. And that's pretty much it. So we'll conclude with Q&A. So I think at this point I'm going to turn it back over to Jason.
Thank you very much, Tom. Yes, we've had a very active list of questions coming through, and you did actually answer one of them, which was how often should a DB visit run. So you did mention that was one of the most asked questions, so we did have that one. We did have another one, Tom, which is around the DB visit again. How long does a DB visit take to run? How long does it actually take?
Okay, that's a good question. DB visit, we get that asked a lot too, because in versions prior to 4.5, DB visit had to be run with the system offline and the database completely quiet. So people wanted to know how long the system had to be down or was going to be down. And then they had to schedule around that amount of time around their production schedule. And what we found is that with in today's world, with many iNEWS systems supporting multiple television stations with different production schedules, finding time to run a DB visit is not that easy. The online DB visit will make it easier because as you saw, the downtime is minimal. You can take the system down for a few minutes to turn checkpoint on, bring it back up, and then the users can use the system while the DB visit is actually running. But again, it all depends on how many stories you have in your database, how fast your servers are. New modern servers, HP or Dell or IBM servers are going to be a lot faster than 8-year-old servers. So if you're running on old servers, you've got a lot of stories in your database. It's just going to take longer, and we can't really quantify a number. It's really impossible to tell you. The more often you run a DB visit, the less it will have to do, and the faster it will run. So if you run a DB visit once every 2 years, it's probably going to take quite a while to complete.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that, Tom. Now we do actually have a couple of questions in from Joseph, and if our technology allows us to, he's actually called in using the callback feature of WebEx, which does allow us to unmute his microphone. So I will hand you now over to Joseph to ask his two questions. Joseph, over to you.
Hi, Tom. How are you? I had two quick questions that you probably saw from earlier. One is the first one, and I'm going back to look at it. We talked a little bit about backing up the database, and whether you have a tape drive or not, and backing up to a file or not. Our system, as it happens, we do have tape drives in our system, but we tend to back up to files. Is there a way, once you've backed up to the file, to then move that backup over to the tape drive?
You could. It's a file, so you could use the Linux tar command to back it up to a tape device. I think that would be probably the easiest way to do it.
Sure. Okay. And then the other question was, you talked about archiving and making sure that when we archive files, we don't want to archive, at least in our scenario, we don't want to archive every back version of the story. And our users in most of our rundowns are actually archiving manually. We haven't automated it. So they're literally cutting things out of the online rundown that they're using and moving it into an archived rundown. Is there a way to set priorities on the archive rundowns so that when we do that, it will automatically delete all the back versions of the stories, so we're not taking up too much space in our database?
I think that would be a feature request, because even if the archive folder has save no versions enabled on it, unless the story is touched on the archive system, meaning it's modified and changed, once it's copied to the archive, it's going to still retain all the versions from the queue it came from.
Sure. So if we then go on the back end and our users move all those stories over, and then we make sure we do a DB original on those folders, that would also cover it, yeah?
Right. Exactly. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
That's great. Thank you very much, Joseph. Good to see that the technology worked there. Well, since we've been chatting, we've actually had quite a few more questions come in. So on to the next one, Tom. This is from Joe. Can you explain a little bit more about the checkpoint? You mentioned that the free list gets copied to the backup partition, but what about the rest of the database? Does this mean that DB visit is running on the live database or a mirror of it on the backup partition?
My understanding is that when you enable checkpoint, so when you install iNEWS on on a system that's running 4.0 or higher, you have to create two partitions for iNEWS. One is an RP5 partition for the database, and one is an RP5-backup partition for the checkpoint functionality for the online DB visit. And that both partitions, the backup has to be at least the same size as the primary. But my understanding is that when you turn checkpoint on, you're copying or creating a copy of the free list on the backup partition, not all the data. You're not copying the entire database over. The DB visit will still examine all the data on the regular DB visit, but then it does something in magic in the background where it compares the free list that's in the backup partition with the existing free list, and it updates the free list. rather than rebuilding it from scratch like the old offline DB visit did. So if you want more real technical deep dive into how that works, I'll talk to our developer and see if I can get some more detail for you, and I can pass it on to you.
Great. Thank you for that, Tom. A question here from James. Does DB3 use a lot of system resources? Can it be run during normal operations?
Yes, DB3 can be run during normal operations. It's not going to present a problem for your system, for your users or anybody else.
Great. Another question here. Can offline DB visit be interrupted?
An offline DB visit can be interrupted up until you rebuild the free list. So if you're running an offline DB visit and it's taking a long time and it gets to the free list, rebuild the free list point and fixing the link counts, and you're not sure it's going to complete in time, you can interrupt it at that point. But once you answer yes to rebuild the free list and fix the link counts, I would not disrupt it. So keep that in mind. Typically, the more often you run the DB visit, the less time it takes to rebuild the free list and fix link counts, unless you've had some sort of database corruption that's had to be repaired because of, say, a server crash or something like that. But if you're running a DB visit and it's the first time you've run it in a year and you get to that point, and you're not sure it's going to finish before your deadline to bring the system back up, I would probably quit out of it and get the system back up for the users.
Okay, thank you, Tom. In the interest of time, let's take a last question from Mark, and it's regarding verifying backups. So how do we verify our backups are good? Is there a way to restore and verify a backup without restoring to a live server?
Well, yes, so you can verify the backup with the T option of the DB restore command. I think we're talking about verifying a DB dump. We went over that briefly, and I may have gone over it pretty quickly. But the T option will list the contents of the DB dump without actually restoring it to without actually restoring those queues and stories to the database. So yes, you can list the contents. It'll list the contents out to the screen. If you wanted, you could probably redirect that to a file, and then later on go back and examine the file and just verify that everything that you expected to be backed up was backed up. Okay. Hope that answered the question.
That sounds good. Thank you very much, Tom. I think we should let's kind of draw our session to a close. So thank you very much, Tom, for conducting today's Tech Talk session. There were many, many more questions which we didn't get round to answer, but Tom will spend the next few days responding to those questions, and we'll be sending out an email to everyone that was on the call with detailed answers to your questions. If you found today's session useful, we actually have quite a few additional iNEWS training options that might be of interest. We also launched our iNEWS Administrator certification. If you'd like to become a certified iNEWS administrator, there's a couple of ways of doing that. One is to attend the IN300 System Admin class, which we can deliver on-site at your facility, and then take the certification exam. If you're already a seasoned iNEWS administrator with plenty of experience, then you can actually just take the exam on its own, and that's available today. If that's of interest, you can get some more details from us by emailing training@avid.com. We're also later next year going to be announcing our user certification that might be of interest to your users, and we'll be offering training and certification through some of our Avid learning partners. So that's coming up next year. And of course, you can always go to our website, avid.com/training, if you want to search for any courses, find out more about our training courses, look at specific times they're running, and which classes are running in your region. So, as we wrap up today's session, I'd like to thank you for attending today's talk. Tech Talk webcast. We hope you found it very valuable and useful. Please stop by our avid.com/techtalk registration page regularly. We do post new sessions up there regularly, and as we start to plan our future web series, we'd like to look at topics that are most valuable to you, to cover the topics that make sense and are of interest to you. With that in mind, we will be sending you a survey in the next 24 hours so that we can capture your feedback on today's session, but also get your feedback on what topics you'd like us to cover in future sessions. The survey should only take a couple of minutes, so we'd really appreciate that valuable feedback. You can also email us at any time, feedback or comments on customer.care@avid.com. So finally, on behalf of Tom, myself, Kelly and Jeff, who were running things in the background, we thank you very much for joining us on today's session.